Hi everyone, welcome to the Sherlock Pages YouTube and podcast, and we're here with a familiar face today to some of you. This is Becky Brown. Becky,
hello.
Welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me back again.
And we're somewhere very special today. We are doing this video and podcast in partnership with the Landmark Trust. Mona has just joined us, for anyone who's listening to this on the audio platforms, not on YouTube. Mona is our dog, Lagotto Roman Yolo truffle dog, for those who don't know. And we are in Frenchman's Creek in Cornwall. And I've got a book here in my hands, which is Daphne du Maurier, 4 great Cornish novels. And it says Jamaica Inn, Rebecca, Frenchman's Creek, and My Cousin Rachel. So Becky, could you tell us just a little bit about Frenchman's Creek, where we are and why this is important for anyone who's interested in Daphne du Maurier?
Mm-hmm. You're going to have to correct my geography if I'm wrong with it, though.
Okay, I can do that.
So yeah, we're here. We're on Frenchman's Creek, which is on part of the Helford River, the Helford Estuary, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we're deep into what I would call du Maurier country. This is where, this is the area that inspired the novel Frenchman's Creek, but that also runs through so many other du Maurier fictions, and also her incredible non-fiction work about Cornwall as well, because she was an exceptional historian of the Cornish landscape, and she just adored it here, and it runs through almost all of her writing.
And we should say that the reason you know so much about Daphne du Maurier is because you represent her literary estate. For anyone who doesn't work in publishing, what does that mean? What do you do?
So I'm one of 2 agents who look after du Maurier's estate, and literary agenting is really about representing the interests of the writer. It's a particularly arcane art after that person has died, because you're also trying to imagine, in tandem with that writer's family or their beneficiaries, what they might want, how they might want their work to continue to exist in the world and to be read. And it's everything from kind of organising new covers for books to making sure that they're available in every language to seeking film and TV adaptations. It's a really vast landscape of rights.
A really busy job, and it's fascinating talking to Becky about this. So Frenchman's Creek here, you can stay in this property. This is a Landmark Trust property, has 2 bedrooms. So we're here with Becky and her husband, and Agat is filming this, my partner. So we're very lucky, and Mona's enjoying it immensely, our dog. Thank you to the Landmark Trust, because we wanted to get the atmosphere of du Maurier country. But actually, we're not here to discuss Frenchman's Creek in particular, although we will do a little side video, bonus video for YouTube on that. We are here to discuss the King's General, which is not one of, in this book, the 4 great Cornish novels, but
Right.
in Becky Brown's view, it is one of the great Cornish novels of Daphne du Maurier. So we picked it in as our December book club pick, Sherlock and Pages. Shall we go inside and discuss why you convinced me that the King's General should be firmly on the list of great Cornish Daphne du Maurier novels?
Let's go sit by the fire.
All right. Come on then, Mona.
Mona, come on.
Okay, Becky, so we're by the fireside in the Frenchman's Creek house. Mona is sleeping away. And today we are going to do a tour of Frenchman's Creek, but we're here to discuss the Sherlock and Pages book club pick for December, which was The King's General. The King's General, there you go. And Becky, when we have this on the table in the shop, people see it and then they see the name Daphne du Maurier and they go, I've never heard of this novel. What's it about? So what is The King's General about? And why did you try and successfully convince me that this needed to be our book club pick?
Okay, so The King's General is set in the English Civil War. It's a gorgeous romance, a absolutely rollicking adventure. It is immaculately researched, and ultimately it's about the relationship of Sir Richard Granville and Honor Harris, who fall in love and are torn apart by circumstance and brought back together by one of the most devastating conflicts in English history.
And these are historically accurate to a degree characters. They really existed. These events, trials, tribulations really occurred. And I, as someone who loves history, and that's part of what Sherlock and Pages does, that's what appealed to me. Why do you think that the King's General isn't known, even by people who adore Daphne du Maurier? And maybe for those who are uninitiated, you could talk about, you know, some of du Maurier's more famous works and where people could start with her writing, etc.
I mean, I think du Maurier is a real victim of her own success. You know, she was a really prolific novelist. I haven't read them all, which I almost feel like I shouldn't admit as a literary agent, but there are so many of them. And they're all great and they're all different. But like anyone who's had a long and successful literary career, some novels rise to the top. Some novels rise to the top. You know, if you're a kind of a du Maurier initiate, you've probably read Rebecca.
Yeah.
You might have read Frenchman's Creek,
Yeah.
Where We Are Today. Do You Make It In?
Yeah.
Or My Cousin Rachel.
Well, some of these have been turned into famous films as well, right? Rebecca
Yeah.
recently, and
Yes.
this must have a really big influence on the notice that these authors get, right? Is it kind of a Netflix phenomenon in the industry at the moment?
I mean, I think Rebecca's fame, I mean, it comes from how extraordinary it is as a reading experience. And you know, it's one of the very few books that I just turned back to the beginning of as soon as I finished it and just read it again. But you know, a lot of people know Rebecca from the Hitchcock film, which is, of course, you know, a completely extraordinary piece of cinema. And there's a whole other podcast about the way that du Maurier's legacy has been defined by, you know, films like Rebecca, The Birds, Don't Look Now, you know, films by men that have used her extraordinary literary ability to make equally extraordinary movies. But I don't know. I mean, no, I don't think it's a Netflix thing, although I do think her absolutely compelling kind of gothic brilliance is never going to go out of style for the screen.
That's a really good phrase, actually. Gothic type of writing. She has a real, from reading The King's General, she has a real talent for giving the people what they want. As I said in the introduction, you know, there are twists and turns. These are adventurous novels, but I also got a lot of history from it. So if we dive into The King's General a little bit more, there is quite an interesting story about how this author was first germinated in Daphne du Maurier's mind, right? And if you could tell us a little bit about Menabilly, which features in this book very, very heavily and is a real life place.
Yeah, I mean, so du Maurier was absolutely smitten with Cornwall. I think smitten in a way feels a bit dismissive.
It's almost not a strong enough word
it
to
resonated.
say how deeply it pulled on
Yeah,
her soul.
it absolutely. I think it consumed her in such an interesting way. And I mean, you know, there are several brilliant writers that come to mind who have really kind of inhabited a landscape in their books and allowed that landscape to inhabit them.
And for anyone, I think we should just say, for anyone who's never been to Cornwall, maybe there's people listening to this who've never been to England or Britain. Cornwall is on the southwest peninsula of the island. It is culturally and historically quite separate from the rest of England. And you cross the Tamar River famously, and then you're into Cornish territory, and that's very much a feature of the King's General. And there's almost a climatic difference here in Cornwall, where there's ferns, as you say. There's sometimes even the palm trees at points down here. It's a very lush atmosphere, but then there's moors at some point. Some points in the landscape, the coastline is so dramatic. The ocean seems to shimmer and gleam in a way that actually you wouldn't really associate with England. It's just the most wonderful place to visit. And I just wanted to say that for people who maybe don't know, but Cornwall is different and it is truly excellent. And unsurprisingly, it's grips Daphne du Maurier, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, all those elements of Cornwall are so present in her fiction, you know, whether it is the kind of fern-lined estuary of the Helford River and Frenchman's Creek, or the kind of absolutely, sort of blasted, desolate moors of Jamaica Inn, or the kind of, the gentle coves and landscape gardens of Rebecca. Every element of Cornwall is in her writing. But what I think is so interesting about the King's General is that the spirit of the Cornish people is in the King's General. It really, it has main characters. It's the kind of Roundheads versus the Cavaliers. It's, it is aristocrats, but within that, she is looking at, who the Cornish are as at that point almost a nation, of their own making.
With the great families that are very famous, even in other works, like people, but just fell over. People may know Poldark, famously from the TV series as well. And some of those great families seem to get mentioned in this novel as well, those great Cornish families. For those who don't know, so this novel is set in the English Civil War. So we're talking the 1640s, where I think sometimes British history can be seen as, well, we don't have revolutions because we're too sensible for that here, which completely is not true. If you look at every century, there's been such revolt and change. This is when Parliament, the parliamentary forces, with deep religious overtones, not undertones as well, revolted against the royal forces. And there's this kind of real split and schism that went through whole families and ripped the country apart. And that is when the King's General is set. Could you give us an insight into why you think Daphne du Maurier chose to write this novel, and without giving away the plot, what people can expect from their reading of it?
Du Maurier frequently drew on history in her work. The Glassblowers, for example, is about her Huguenot ancestors moving from France to London, or Marianne is about a kind of a fascinating woman who was deep in Du Maurier's own family line. And she when she came to Cornwall, and when she kind of integrated into Cornish, the kind of upper classes of Cornish society, she heard about a skeleton that had been found bricked into the wall of a great house, and it was believed to date from the Civil War, and that skeleton inspired the story of the King's General. But I mean, I was Landmark Trusts have these incredible little bookcases. I always, whenever we come to a landmark, I look forward to seeing what the landmark librarian has decided to put in there.
Well, at this point, we've got to say that me and Becky both live in Frome, and Becky happened to be in the shop when in walked the lady who curates all of the Landmark Trust libraries, and it was just almost farcical because we had such a deeply enthusiastic conversation with her, basically singing her praises about how good these bookcases are in every Landmark Trust property. It was hilarious. I couldn't almost believe it was happening because we'd already talked about how good they were.
Yeah, and the one here obviously stuffed with Du Maurier, as it should be. And one of the books that I've been dipping into while we've been here is and I would pick it up. It's next to me here, but Mona's.
Should I pick it up for you?
Yeah, will you?
It's Vanishing Cornwall by Daphne du Maurier.
Yeah.
Can I get that in there? Oh, are we there? Agat, give us the hands up or down, hands down. Yeah, no, we're good. So my partner Agat is behind the camera here. Right.
And so this is a kind of love letter to Cornwall. It is not fiction, which is actually I was going to say it's unusual for Du Maurier, but it's not. She wrote loads of non-fiction, and I mean, I could force you to read any of her books, but my goodness, her biography of Bramwell Bronte is incredible. The Infernal World of Bramwell Bronte. You should read it. But this is it moves through all of Cornwall, region by region, and it tells the story of its people, its history. It describes the landscape beautifully. It's all accompanied by photos by her son, Christian.
Yeah, I'm glad you showed this to me, because I think that you get the impression with Du Maurier that, yeah, obviously she's been so gripped by this landscape, but like a lot of the great writers, there is a huge iceberg of knowledge, and the novels are just the tip that's showing over the surface of the water. And I think, I didn't know she'd written this book, Vanishing Cornwall, but it doesn't surprise me that she understands those great families. She understands the industries that moved this county, the passions, the economic interests. So it's very apt that this book is here on this shelf.
Yeah. And, you know, it has a whole section on what the English Civil War did to Cornwall. It talks about Sir Richard Granville, who's I want to say probably the anti-hero of the King's General.
I had in my notebook a very simple question. So we don't want to give away too much, but there's this character in the King's General, who is the King's General, Richard Granville. And my question was, did you like Richard Granville in the book? Because he is certainly... He has big character energy.
Yeah.
Main character energy.
I think he's one of those characters where if he was dating your friend, you'd be sort of horrified, but you'd also be sort of jealous. You know? And I mean, I think you've been quite enamoured by him over the weekend. You keep saying that you're Sir Richard Grenville.
when I have a capricious turn. Yeah. And also the way that he just like pushes through situations, and he's just got a huge character. I mean, in my own life, I'm so not Richard Grenville, but or hopefully not. But it's hard not to see a character like that. That's just, you know, slightly ridiculous. But also, I think we've all come across them in our lives. So at some point. So
yeah, I think as well. What's fascinating is, you know, du Maurier counterbalances him so perfectly with her heroine on it, who is paralysed from the neck down.
And I think is actually the main character of the novel.
Oh, yes, and of course she's our narrator.
Yeah, and it's difficult because we can't go too much into and ruin this amazing.
No, and we wouldn't want to. No.
But people should definitely dive into The King's General and give it a read. And you've been working on the audiobooks, is that right? Are you allowed to say anything about that?
I mean they are the first the second batch of audiobooks are a week away from being released. So WF Howes, who are a massive kind of independent audiobook producer and who have committed to releasing almost all of du Maurier in audio, which is incredible. I mean, so much of it has just never been available before. And yeah, The King's General is coming out next week, actually.
I want to give a plug to Libro FM, which might be where Becky's sister works. And Libro FM partner with independent bookshops, independent booksellers, so that you can get your audiobooks and they benefit real physical world shops as well. And I sometimes like to listen to audiobooks. For example, I would have listened to part of The King's General whilst I was coming down to Cornwall, but then we had a laugh because we realised it's actually coming out next week. But hopefully by the time this is posted, you could get it. And Libro FM is a really good way of doing that and supporting your independent bookshops as well. But I do always like to mix any audiobooks I listen to with a physical copy. And I kind of actually do this weird thing where I intersperse them.
I think that's really common now.
Okay.
Actually. Yeah.
Particularly with big books where there are 800-900 pages, big biographies. I find I'll read 150 pages and then whilst driving, maybe I'll go through a few chapters.
I always think people's audiobook habits are one of the most interesting book questions that you can ask in the modern era. Like, for example, I really like to listen to them while I'm kind of washing up or while I'm in the bath, like something where I wouldn't have a book, but otherwise I'm just, you know, sort of sat in a sort of terrified mess of my own thoughts.
I do it whilst driving because when I'm cooking or something, I'm watching YouTube videes like this, which is what I recommend people do.
What Sherlock Pages YouTube videos while they
anything me exploring churches.
Are you watching yourself while you cook?
No, I've not gone full Richard Grenville yet. But on The King's General, this is one of, and I am obsessed with 17th century history. I often on my English Pilgrim page, Mona's snoring. Do you want to put the mic next to her? So Mona is snoring there. In Becky's arms for anyone who's listening to this and not watching it on YouTube. Mona being our dog. But anyway, the 17th century, when this is set, one of the most interesting parts, we might have to wake her up and get her... Right, Moans, you need to stop snoring on the podcast. I think people will appreciate this, so don't worry about it.
Is this ASMR?
Never work with children and animals because they'll start snoring. Monesy, wake up. Right.
Good girl.
Right, for the fourth time. 17th century. We have had so many books set in the Tudor period, so many TV series set in the Tudor period. There is a Tudor obsession. Obviously, this is the 16th century, and it just causes such fascination. There are some amazing history books, but more sort of just factual non-fiction set in the 17th century. Why do you think... Mona, Becky, maybe get her off you for us to continue.
Go on.
Come on.
Go to your cat.
Go to your mum. All right. So we've got Mona away.
Okay,
I'll continue. I think we can just continue.
If a podcast ever needed what's the offcuts? Outtakes.
We'll just
If a
leave it.
podcast
And I
ever
think
needed
people
outtakes.
love Mona, so it's fine. Why do you think the 17th century hasn't had its moment in fiction? Do you feel that's fair? Do you think that's a fair statement from me? Because I'm sure there are a lot of novels, but just none that seem to be really famous. Maybe some of those amazing ones out there that listeners might be screaming at the screen or whatever now and saying, well, what about this? And maybe we can get the King's General, onto people's map to start an awareness of this stuff.
I mean, I'm terrified of revealing my ignorance.
Yeah.
about
yeah.
what brilliant Civil War novels there might be.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I've been thinking about this a bit while we've been here, and I think, I don't know. I think we tend to distill the Civil War down to Oliver Cromwell. I mean,
Right,
is there even
okay.
an Oliver Cromwell novel though? I don't know. Like, has someone
must
done
be,
what
I
Hilary
mean-
Mantel did for Thomas Cromwell?
Well, this is the thing. I think Hilary Mantel, who, I mean, I would be surprised if anyone was listening to this and didn't know, but her Wolf Hall trilogy set around the character of Thomas Cromwell, which can be confusing because they're no relation to Oliver Cromwell.
Well, actually, he was.
Oh, was he a distant relation?
So Oliver Cromwell was a descendant of Thomas Cromwell's nephew, Richard Cromwell.
Ah, okay. But no direct causation.
Not like great grandson or something. No.
So, and they have very, very different histories, but I think that Hilary Mantel brought to life the Tudor period and the drama of Henry VIII and his court for people and some of the main characters around that time, like Cardinal Wolsey, Thomas More, Thomas Cromwell, Anne Boleyn, and this has just gripped people's imagination and set creative minds on fire, and the checkbooks of TV producers as well. So as someone who just thinks the 17th century is arguably not more interesting, but it's certainly as interesting in the sense that you get all of this religious upheaval, which I think opens up huge questions about the modern world, really. And I think that that's why Britain is such an interesting place at this time. I would really point people to the King's General to start to dive into that. And we could certainly make history book recommendations from Sherlock and Pages.
So what would you recommend for someone who, had a burgeoning interest in the English Civil War?
There's a book called The World Turned Upside Down by Christopher Hill, which I read in the lockdown. And Christopher Hill was quite a character. He was kind of a Marxist historian, I believe, at Oxford. And he wrote this book, The World Turned Upside Down, because it was a phrase used in a propaganda pamphlet coming into the civil wars. And that book covers how dramatic the changes in thought are, going from, you have to consider a 16th century where until the dissolution of the monasteries, until the Reformation, there was kind of one system of thought, and then you get this total explosion of energy and ideas, and you start to see the Quakers coming, who viewers in America will certainly recognize had such an impetus in the birth of American society and democracy. You get people called Shakers who are sort of related. You get all of this religious fever. You get the idea that it's the individual's relationship with God directly that is so important. And I think if you think about that, where that potentially leads up intellectually, you could argue the birth of the individual, but it's so dramatic, the scenes and the thought process of people that time, and the title, "The World Turned Upside Down," is just perfect, because everything that was held to be true, everything that was believed dearly, is open for debate all of a sudden. And I think the fire of the English Civil Wars is the distillation of that. I think it was an inevitable confrontation of some of those religious ideas.
Interesting. I mean, we've talked quite a bit, you and I, over this weekend about the depth of du Maurier's historical research. And, in the King's General, you can really, and it's worn very lightly. And, you talk about that iceberg, like what the novelist knows versus the story they tell. And, that sense of religious conflict is running very gently through the King's General. You have that kind of sense that, Honor and Sir Richard Granville, who are, they're for the king. He's the King's General. They're royalists. They, within that, are also Catholics, or have a remnant of the kind of old Catholic faith. They are against the sort of brand of pure. They are against the brand of Puritanism that comes with Cromwell's Roundheads.
It is quite light in the King's General. It certainly gets there's heavier commentary on this stuff at the end. But I think we still live with these ideas as well, for anyone who's not British. But you get, even in, and I don't want to characterize people because it's really complex, but in these like Brexit debates, you get, almost like these romantic, cavalier and roundhead ideas of, who stands for the true patriotism of the country. Some people are the more boring Puritan intellectuals, others are the, fiery royalists, and you get these ideas of the different undercurrents of British and particularly English identity, although not exclusively. It's very complicated. So I would really recommend people give the King's General a read. Thank you so much for recommending it for us. Just before we leave and we go and explore Frenchman's Creek and show people a little bit of that on camera, if you had some opening recommendations for anyone who's never read Daphne du Maurier, where would you tell them to start, do you think?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I do think that Rebecca is one of the best novels ever written. Like,
really?
Yes, I really do. Ever. I think in its...
Just before you go on to that, Daphne du Maurier is sometimes looked down upon a little bit. I think that
you see my facial expression.
Yeah. But I just think that that's out there in the world. Why do you would you accept that? And why do you think that is? And you've just said she wrote one of the best novels ever. That doesn't sound like someone who should be looked down on.
I could write an essay on why we look down on brilliant fiction. And, and I mean, things that aren't necessarily worthy, that aren't telling us deep truths about people, or that aren't actually, no, I'm going to start all of that again. I think that du Maurier's vast success as a novelist, I mean, Rebecca sold tens of thousands of copies in, its first print run. It sold it out. It was a sensation from the moment it was published. And, she was already a very, very well-regarded popular novelist. Before that, she went on to write many other brilliant books. And I think there's a snobbery in how we, in how we think about great works, which I don't know. I wonder if there's a point where we get far enough away from it that stops. I mean, for example, like, Dickens, read by everybody, serialized, but nobody now is criticizing popularity.
Do you think there's an intellectual thing going on where, because it's so accessible and so loved by so many, there's an intellectual class that wants to remain exclusive and therefore kind of shuts the door on that being the very best stuff, possibly?
Yes, no, I think that's fair. I also think people judge novels written by women more harshly than novels written by men.
Historically, or do you think that's correct?
I think far less so now. I mean, there's a lot of kind of, you can call it hand-wringing or celebration depending on the party, but there's a lot of discussion in publishing at the moment about the dominance of female voices in fiction. It certainly wasn't the case. I mean, many of the really interesting writers I work with who have, whose books have not survived in the sense that they have not continued to be read, they need, pushing back into the world, are women. And, their books were dismissed as, domestic or feminine or small in some way. And I don't know, I mean, Rebecca actually is a really interesting case in point. There was a whole kind of dialogue around it this year about what someone coined Rebecca syndrome, which is when you are absolutely obsessed by your partner's ex.
Oh, okay.
But actually, she's sort of the first person to write. I guess you could kind of argue Wuthering Heights has a bit of that in it as well, but she Mona, thank you for lying on my foot. Yeah, I don't know. It's a question that needs a longer podcast, I think.
So we'll go to the final word, which would be people should definitely read Rebecca, one of the best novels ever written. And then they should not overlook The King's General. And Sherlock and Pages will do everything within its tiny powers to get this novel on the map. So we'll have it on the website, we'll have it on the table. I think we'll leave it there. We'll go and take Mona out if we can ever wake her up. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.